Yesterday it was Nigel Farage's big day, and his manifesto, or lack of a manifesto, was the talking point. What was in his manifesto that isn't a manifesto?
A lot of red meat was what was in his manifesto, non-manifesto. Nigel Farage has launched his, effectively, wish list for what he says he would do. He's quite open about the fact that he's not going to be in government this time round. But, I mean, he has set his sights on being Prime Minister in 2029. So it's essentially a marker for what he'll do in the Commons and what his party will, where his party will effectively push the agenda.
Yeah, well, yesterday where they held their news conference to launch, but they weren't launching the manifesto, in quite a rundown leisure centre in Wales, which was quite deliberate and giving what sort of message, do you think?
Well, the message, I mean, the location was a Labour heartlands location, and it's an interesting shift from the Reform campaign, because previously they were only focusing on unseating the Conservative Party, and now it looks like they're getting quite confident about their position in the polls, and they're actually starting to target Labour. I mean, I know from speaking to very nervous Conservative candidates that the fear for them with Reform is not just Reform taking Conservative voters, but also it's where they take Labour votes as well, and that's where they will come in through either second or even first.
I mean, Anna, it's interesting, isn't it, looking at what they were proposing yesterday. It really is the definition of populism.
That's great.
Stuff that everybody wants to see, increased spending,
tax cuts for everyone.
Tax cuts for everyone, but does it in a way just engender and foster dissatisfaction. It's undeliverable, reminds people of what we all want but we can't really have, and is therefore part of the problem and part of the reason why people are saying Farage entering into this race at this point is the return of chaos to politics. Is that fair?
No, I don't think it is the return to chaos. I think actually it's perfectly normal and understandable for a small party like this to have this kind of wish list. I mean, look at the Greens, look at the Lib Dems,
even the Conservatives, to be perfectly frank, with their 13 billion or whatever it is that they want to.
That's a whole other story.
Yeah,
I mean, the Conservatives are acting like, and they've called themselves the underdog. They are saying we are the underdog in this race. It is extraordinary to have a serving government say that. But Reform doing this, you know, these parties do serve a purpose in bringing in new ideas and setting the agenda. And we've already seen some, I think Wes Streeting on the weekend said that there's some things from the Lib Dem manifesto he'd pick out. So this is very significant in the sense that there will be Conservatives looking at this and saying, right, this is where our party should be heading to. And there already are.
And meanwhile, Boris Johnson being leaned on by the Conservatives, he's just lent his signature to a series of letters that are being sent up to the Red Wall. He's not out on the campaign trail. He's not really putting his full heft behind the Conservatives. Does that speak perhaps to his relationship with the party or his relationship with Sunak? And, you know, does Nigel Farage need to worry about Boris Johnson further down the line? Because it seems a lot of the conversation now is actually about not this election, but what Farage will do after the election.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people in the Conservative Party, a lot of candidates who say the only person who could take on Farage is Boris Johnson. I mean, both of them have that populist appeal, that name recognition. And I think what we've seen Boris Johnson do is sort of what he's been saying he's been doing. So he'll write letters and do videos for candidates who ask him. So his line is, I'll help anyone who asks me, but yeah, he's not out and about. He's not on a bus this time around.
But if, as Isabel is saying, the manifesto pledges are undeliverable, I don't know if they are or not. What I applaud Reform for is thinking outside the box and actually going places that other people aren't going and what they're talking about. So how undeliverable are those promises?
I mean, the tax cuts go further than Liz Truss. So I think that, you know, it's very hard to see the markets. The city won't like it. There are certain things in there. I mean, net zero migration, very few people think that's actually doable. Things like... But equally, they're throwing things into the mix that even certain Conservatives have been talking about. So they talk about scrapping or cutting significantly the foreign aid budget to free up billions. I mean, that's something...
Well, who's going to object to that?
That's something Robert Jenrick proposed with us a few months ago. He was ignored by Number 10. So there are things in there that I know Conservatives will look at and say, right, we want this. Why isn't our party doing it? Why is
You see, the foreign aid budget, I find amazing. I think that is a vote winner. That the people, nobody's going to object to that. Now, I know Isabel's looking at me and saying, yes, all caring, bleeding heart people.
No, well, look, all I'm doing is putting the opposite view and playing devil's advocate. But some people who would defend the foreign aid budget would say a huge part of the problem that we have with migration is because there are problems in these countries at source, and the foreign aid budget goes some way to not only preventing war...
Well, why do we waste our time to
Well, because
that?
otherwise then they all want to come and live here. So arguably, if you can make life better there, it's money well spent. That's the argument. But a 50% cut in foreign aid is what they're proposing, which is a huge chunk and would take us well below any of our international peers, I presume.
Who cares? Who cares? Nobody cares.
And I think the people who back it say there is some good work being done, but there's also a huge amount of waste. And you get those anecdotal examples of us funding
corruption, a huge amount of problems with corruption as well.
But at the same time, I think a lot of people would say take that money, put it in a tax cut for working people.
It's interesting when we look at, I suppose what I was alluding to about reform was that at least there are exciting proposals coming forward from them. You look at Labour, nailed-on favourites for this. Nothing exciting from anything that they're proposing. They're playing it very, very safe. The Conservatives, as you say, have to come and see more small party, make big promises about things. Who has caught your eye, and does it matter if their proposals are exciting or not?
Well,
I mean, you can look at the Conservatives and you can say, well, you've had the ball for 14 years or so and done nothing with it.
Exactly. I think, all I can say is the main complaint with Rishi Sunak and where he's taken this party is people say, right, you've got all this opportunity and you've had all this opportunity to bring in loads of ideas and revamp, and all you've done is talk about banning smoking and doing maths for 18-year-olds. I mean, that gets repeated all the time from people who are unhappy with the party. So when they look at things like the tax cuts in Reform's budget manifesto, like it's mostly language on immigration, but certainly that statement of intent, they will say they're interested. And, there are things in there as well. I mean, it shows Nigel Farage's links to the city and his past experience, because there are
Richard Tice's financial background,
and the company the company they keep
beneficial to people who are wealthy. To be perfectly frank, which I think is fascinating when they're launching it in Merthyr Tydfil and they're talking about scrapping inheritance tax under £2 million and increasing the.
But there are also some interesting things, seemingly interesting things in there about how to free up that money by, for example, not allowing central banks to charge interest. Like there are some banking proposals that I found quite curious, and I'm not a banker qualified to be able to say whether or not they're workable, but they certainly sound interesting, and I think that's what people want, and that's certainly what they would have wanted from the Labour manifesto, which is just, please, please, please don't take away our poll. Please, 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 just give us a chance. Don't blame them, but it's effective, but it's not inspiring.
Right, well, what would be inspiring? Anna, I know you're going to come back and we'll talk again later on.